In 71 BCE, Rome put about 6,000 crucified rebels along the Appian Way after Spartacus fell, and that was the public lesson. What happened to captive women away from the road was harder to track. Today, I will show you 20 torture devices linked to captive women in ancient Rome. Let's start with number 20, vaginal impalement. Historians describe impalement taking hours or days to kill, because the stake held the body upright while life drained slowly. Why would a state choose that? Because it worked as a public sign. People saw the body, understood the warning, and stayed quiet even if they hated the rulers watching. Later accounts say the stake could enter through the genitals or rectum and exit the torso, which turned suffering into street theater. Records place impalement across Europe and the Near East, used on rebels and traitors. The display mattered more than the trial, and crowds learned fast from one look. Modern research on genocidal rape shows vaginal impalement reappearing when armies aim to break a community through women. That pattern fits what Roman power did after slave uprisings, when bodies were placed along roads. The message sounded simple: your body belongs to the state, and you feel it before thinking. Most detailed reports come from later centuries, so historians stay careful about what Rome used directly. Still, public display plus sexual targeting keeps showing up together. If a stake could rule a road, imagine a tool meant for hidden rooms, like the metal pair waiting in silence right under guard. Here comes number 19, pair of anguish. Most surviving pairs date to around the 1600s, which already should make you pause when a museum calls it medieval. The device looks like a metal fruit, and a screw spreads 4 leaves. Could that design hurt? Yes, but evidence for courtroom use stays thin, though the story sells hard. Labels claim it went into the mouth, anus, or vagina, then opened to tear from inside, a perfect horror prop. Early mentions describe a gag thieves used on rich victims, which shifts the story away from judges. When court records stay silent, historians treat the claim as doubtful for now. Some scholars call this dark medievalism, where modern people imagine the past as non-stop torture because it feels dramatic. Yet the fear points to something real. Punishment often targeted women's mouths and genitals when they spoke up, refused sex, or broke rules. The myth survives because the power pattern survived. So when you hear pair of anguish, ask one question: what proof exists, and what got added later? That habit matters, because another famous object lives on the same border between fact and fantasy. A so-called iron chastity belt still gets shown as history, even when it is not. Let's move to number 18, iron chastity belt. Most physical chastity belts in collections come from the 19th century, not the Crusades, and that is why many historians call them fakes or jokes. Yet tour guides still repeat the Crusader wife story. Why does it stick? Because it matches a real obsession with controlling women's sex lives through fear. One researcher described these as fantasy objects, made when Victorian Europe fixated on sex, purity, and punishment. The belt story fails because the trail points late, and court files do not describe women locked in iron underwear. So the belt matters less as a device, more as propaganda about obedience. Rome used law and status for control. Female adultery could mean exile and loss of property, with social ruin, while men had freedom. Enslaved women had less protection. Owners could rape them, sell children, or mark them with brands. A belt was unnecessary when the system treated bodies as property. The belt story can be false, while the obsession behind it stays true. When control shifts from law to raw pain, wooden devices replace paperwork. One beam in early modern Europe forced victims to straddle a sharp ridge called the Spanish donkey, and gravity did the rest. Fast for everyone. Next one is number 17. Spanish donkey. Sources place the Spanish Inquisition and later courts behind the Spanish donkey, a beam shaped like a roof ridge. The victim straddled the edge while hands were tied, so sitting turned into pain. Why does a simple beam matter? Because body weight becomes the weapon, minute after minute without mercy. Accounts describe guards lowering the person onto the ridge, sometimes adding ankle weights so pressure increased as the legs hung free. Pain focused on inner thighs and genitals, and some victims lost the ability to walk afterward. The damage worked as a sentence, because disability followed the person back home. This device is better documented after Rome, so you should treat any ancient Roman donkey claim with caution. Still, the method fits a wider habit, punishments that attack mobility and sexuality together. For women, straddling while exposed added public humiliation, and crowds learned the rule by watching in real time. Here is what gets missed. The donkey punished the lower body, yet the threat was social. We can do this again. Courts loved tools that trained bystanders. When the state wanted silence instead of limping victims, it used metal on the mouth. The scold's bridle made speech feel dangerous fast. Let's move to number 16. Scold's bridle. Records from Scotland and England show the scold's bridle used from the 1500s onward. It locked a metal cage around the head, with a plate forced into the mouth. Why punish talk with hardware? Because it turned speech into a crime that neighbors could witness, laugh at, and repeat daily. Some versions added a tongue spike, so every attempt to speak pressed harder. In 17th century Scotland, women stood for a marketplace hour, drooling and unable to answer jeers. Quaker preacher Dorothy Waugh later described wearing the bridle in 1655, showing the tool was not just rumor, it was policy there. Ancient Rome used different gear, yet the silence rule feels familiar. Roman law treated outspoken women, especially around politics or sex, as trouble. Accused women could be paraded, shamed, or pushed into exile for adultery. The result was the same: keep quiet, or lose your place and protection very fast. The bridle looks until you picture breathing around metal while a crowd waits for you to fail. It punished the voice, not the back, which made it feel personal. When authorities wanted pain that showed on the body, they returned to beams. The wooden horse made people watch you wobble. If this video has you leaning in, give it hype right now. Hit subscribe, tap like, and drop a quick comment so this series reaches more people. The next devices get more personal, and the records get messier, so stay with me, because we are about to separate myth from real punishment. Here comes number 15, wooden horse. A Maltese judicial history describes soldiers using a chevalet to discipline prisoners, lowering them inch by inch onto a triangular beam. The idea sounds simple, yet it can cut and crush at the same time. Why would an army use that? Because it leaves a living warning that works tomorrow. France and Spain also describe a triangular beam where victims were forced to ride with wrists tied, and weights sometimes hung from ankles. The weight shift matters because it concentrates pressure on the inner body. Clear documentation comes after Rome, yet the method fits punishment that aims for helpless exposure. For women accused of sex crimes or witchcraft, the beam did two jobs. It hurt and it shamed. The open posture told the crowd what the court thought of her body. After use in public, the phrase "ride the horse" could control people, because rumor carried the threat into homes. What surprises me is how little equipment this needed, just wood, rope, and spectators. That meant punishment could happen quickly, with little paperwork. Some towns moved from beams to something even simpler, an upright post and a lash. A whipping post turns skin into a message, and everyone reads it. Let's move to number 14, whipping post. Between 1900 and 1945, historians estimate Delaware whipped about 1,600 people at posts, usually 10 to 60 lashes. That is modern, which should reset how you think about old cruelty. So what did Rome do with flogging? Masters used it as routine control over enslaved bodies inside homes and workshops. A whipping post needs wood, rope, and someone willing to swing. The pain came from the lash, yet the public exposure did extra damage because clothing was stripped from the back, sometimes more. Crowds watched every flinch, turning punishment into spectacle, similar to how Rome used roadside executions for intimidation. In Delaware records, women rarely faced the post, and when they did, they were almost always black women. That fact shows punishment follows social power. For captive women, the post mixed pain with humiliation, since stripping let crowds stare. Scars healed, yet they stayed as warnings that owners could repeat. A whip can leave lines that fade, so officials could claim the damage was temporary. Some punishers wanted marks that stayed, and heat solved that. Heated iron appears in medieval sources for punishing slaves, rebels, and women accused of sexual sins. Red-hot tongs made the threat feel immediate to anyone. Next one is number 13, red-hot tongs. Roman law allowed brutal penalties for slaves, including burning and mutilation, penalties free citizens avoided. That legal split matters because it created a class of bodies the state and owners could damage openly. Heated tongs were simple iron tools, warmed until glowing, then pressed onto skin to tear or burn. Martyr stories show how far this went. In the story of Saint Agatha, torturers tore at her breasts with hot instruments before execution. Even when a victim survived, burns invited infection in an age without antibiotics. That risk was part of the point. Scars and sickness could follow for months. What makes tongs chilling is the everyday tool angle. A guard needed no rack, just heat and time, so torture could happen in a kitchen, yard, or cell. For captive women, that meant uncertainty, because any object could become a weapon. Pain came in bursts, but the mark kept speaking. Tongs burn in one place, so a torturer controls the timing. Some wanted heat to spread, and hot liquid did that fast. Museums claim molten lead, yet records mention boiling oil and pitch poured onto skin or wounds. The lead sprinkler, a bulb with holes, made it portable in prison. Let's move to number 12, lead sprinkler. The lead sprinkler is a metal bulb on a handle, pierced with holes, built to spray hot liquid. That design matters because it lets one person burn a wide area quickly. If you picture prisons with no medical care, what happens after the pour? Burns swell, open, and invite infection. The tool shows how torture became handheld punishment. A jailer could heat a pot, fill the bulb, then sprinkle a victim without building a rack. Hot liquid could be aimed at sensitive areas, and accounts mention humiliation when the target was near a woman's genitals. Survival meant living with burns. In a world without antibiotics, burns could turn into infected wounds that reopened during labor. That created a trade-off for torturers. Push too far and the prisoner dies. Go slower and the scars stay visible. The sprinkler favored slow damage, since it could be used in bursts across days. Portable tools made secrecy easier, because torture could happen in a corner with no crowd. When liquid and fire failed to get answers, interrogators shifted to rope and gravity. Tie hands behind the back, lift the body, and shoulders tear. Strappato sounds clinical, yet the pain is simple and fast. Here comes number 11, strappato. Inquisition records from early modern Europe describe strappado as a standard interrogation method. Hands were tied behind the back, the rope went up, and the body hung from the shoulders. What does that do? It can dislocate joints fast, and pain comes from your own weight, not a blade alone. Some interrogators added the drop, letting the person fall a short distance, then yanking them up again. That jolt could tear muscles and worsen dislocations. The method leaves few cuts, which lets officials pretend it was controlled. Survivors could lose arm function and never recover strength enough to work again. For women, strappado often adds sexual shame. Hanging naked in a room or courtyard meant the audience mattered as much as the rope. Rome used violence on enslaved women to demand obedience, including beatings and branding. A torn shoulder can mean dependence, because work requires arms and money requires work. Strappado shows how courts chased confession, because once you confessed, officials could claim the process was legal. When the rope came down, damage stayed hidden under clothing. Rome chose the opposite: marks worn in public. Archaeologists found iron collars engraved with orders like, "This is a runaway slave, catch her." Let's move to number 10. Iron collar. Archaeologists found a Roman collar from North Africa engraved, "This is a runaway slave, catch her." That sentence was the tool. A collar turns the neck into a billboard, and it travels everywhere the person goes. Think about that. Every street becomes a checkpoint, even without guards watching you pass. Another collar, found with a female skeleton, called her a cheating whore and told people to seize her if she ran. That shows ownership mixed with sexual shaming. Collars could block sleep and scrape skin. Unlike a jail term, the punishment stayed until an owner removed it or she died. Rome used face marks. Sources describe branding or tattooing runaways with letters like FUG for fugitivus, so identity could be read at a glance. Combine that with a collar and escape becomes harder, because strangers have proof and permission. For enslaved women, the result was constant exposure, even during tasks. Later systems copied this with neck irons for servants and wives labeled disobedient. The logic stays simple, keeps the label visible, and control lasts. Other punishments invited crowds to join. A frame locked head and hands in public, leaving you stuck while strangers decided the cruelty. That was the pillory. Here comes number 9. Pillory. The pillory held your head and hands on boards in a busy public place. Once the frame closed, you stood bent forward and could not protect yourself. What happened then depended on the crowd. People threw rotten food, stones, and filth, and the humiliation often mattered more than injury alone. Sources describe victims being groped or sexually assaulted while trapped, because the frame made escape impossible. Women accused of sex crimes or witchcraft faced the pillory in towns, and clothing could be pulled down or hair cut off during the sentence. Courts used it to let neighbors punish behavior themselves. Rome did not use the pillory frame, yet it relied on public shame. Accused women could be paraded, and adultery could bring exile and loss of status. The pillory copies that logic, but it hands enforcement to strangers. A judge sets the frame, and bystanders decide the pain up close. Crowd violence gave cover because everyone could claim they were watching. That made the pillory unpredictable. Some courts preferred a method with a role for the executioner and a script. The breaking wheel did that, tying the body down and smashing bones one by one, so the lesson stayed organized. Let's move to number 8, breaking wheel. Bavaria abolished the breaking wheel in 1813, yet parts of Germany recorded use as late as 1841. That timeline shows how long public execution lasted in Europe. The method tied a person to a wheel or blocks. Then an executioner smashed bones with bars, sometimes weaving the body into spokes. Sources describe the body being raised for crowds, turning death into open-air theater. The wheel was used across Europe from antiquity into the 19th century, and the design encouraged a slow end over a quick one. A process gives the crowd time to absorb the warning and spread it. Women could face the wheel after charges like witchcraft, infanticide, or killing a husband. Judges ordered partial stripping before the sentence, so the public saw the body being judged. That shows the cost. Courts claimed justice, yet they used shame as fuel. The wheel punished the body at once, too. The wheel needed space and a specialist. Some states preferred a smaller setup that still looked official. Spain used a metal collar on a post, tightened by a screw, for centuries. Officials called it orderly. The device was the garrote, and it turned killing into a procedure fast. Next one is number 7, garrote. Spain used the garrote as an official execution method for centuries, reaching into the 20th century. Instead of a rope, it used a metal collar on a post with a screw. Why switch tools? Officials wanted death to look official, even while the victim faced panic as pressure increased quietly. Mechanically, it was simple. A bar pressed into the neck as the screw turned. Airflow dropped, and the spine could be damaged. Spain used it to replace hangings, trading rope chaos for fixed hardware. Officials could stage the killing as orderly, even while the person strapped in panicked for minutes. For women, execution could follow public shaming. Accused witches or rebels might be paraded, then seated into the collar. Authorities sometimes called the garrote mercy compared with burning, yet slow pressure and terror still count as torture. Rome ranked punishments by status. Slaves faced harsher deaths. Elite women faced exile. After the garrote, some punishments kept a person alive but permanently labeled. Branding did that with heat and a stamp, turning skin into a record strangers could read. Rome branded runaway slaves, and later slave systems copied it. Picture a branding iron touching skin, and temporary punishment sounds like a joke. Let's move to number 6, branding iron. Roman sources describe branding runaway slaves on the forehead with letters like FUG, FUR, and KAL. That turned a face into paperwork, because anyone could read the label. Why choose the forehead? Because it travels everywhere and stops hiding in a crowd. A mark can fade, but a brand stays. Branding worked with collars and patrols to make escape harder. Once a person wore visible proof, owners needed fewer guards because strangers could identify and seize. This created a trade-off. The victim stayed alive for labor, yet carried stigma. Even if you changed towns, the brand moved with you. Later systems copied branding on a scale. In the Atlantic slave trade, millions of Africans received brands for a crown, a shipping company, or an owner. For women, brands on the breast, shoulder, or face announced ownership and shame, especially when linked to sex accusations. The mark made rumors official. A brand is one strike, and the mark stays. Some punishers preferred repeated hits that kept reopening skin. Whips fitted with knots or metal tips could do that, and writers called versions scorpions. Counting lashes looked neat on paper, yet each number meant another tear. A scorpion whip shows a gap. Here comes number 5, scorpion whip. Roman flagellation used whips with knots or weights on slaves and condemned prisoners, so the whip already carried more than sting. Later devices, nicknamed scorpions, added metal tips or hooks that grabbed skin. Why change the design? Because tearing flesh breaks resistance faster, and the injuries stay visible longer afterward. For women, whippings centered on the back and buttocks, sometimes legs, with clothing stripped away for maximum exposure. Enslaved women had no legal shield against this. In households, lashings could mix with rape, branding, and labor, making punishment a system, not a single event. The whip taught obedience through pain. Records list numbers like 10, 40, 60 lashes. That looks neat in a ledger, yet each strike digs deeper, increases blood loss, and raises infection risk. A court can set a number, but skin reacts to every hit. The body does not care about paperwork when the whip lands again. Whips work in public, yet interrogators like tools that hurt in silence. Focused pain can be felt because it has nowhere to spread. That is where thumb screws enter, crushing fingers inch by inch to force words out. Once hands are damaged, work gets harder, and dependence becomes a form of control. Next one is number 4, thumb and finger screws. Thumb and finger screws used 2 metal plates and a threaded bolt. A jailer slipped in a thumb, then turned until bone pressed against metal. Why did courts like this? Because it looked small and manageable, so officials could call it mild while the pain stayed intense and local always. Inquisitors and courts used it to get forced confessions. For women already weakened by flogging, the screw could feel worse than a beating because every nerve in the hand lights up at once. The tool damages grip, which makes work harder for years after. Roman and later systems relied on confession as proof. Once someone freely confessed, officials could claim it followed law, even when torture produced the words. Women accused of heresy, witchcraft, or infanticide faced that demand. Say it, or the screw keeps turning. Crushed fingers crippled victims long after the trial ended. Thumb screws targeted a finger, yet courts also used executions built around cutting. Early modern accounts link some methods to extreme crimes tied to rebellion or religious conflict. Historians debate frequency, yet dismemberment appears in the toolkit. That jump from hand pain to body cutting has a label: saw torture. Let's move to number 3, saw torture. One saw torture method hangs the victim upside down while executioners saw between spread legs. Gravity keeps blood to the brain, so consciousness can last longer during the cut. That detail appears in early modern descriptions of punishment for extreme crimes, and it shows the goal was suffering, not speed. How common was this setup? Historians debate it, because some reports come from hostile writers or later retellings. Still, public cutting and dismemberment appear in toolkits across conflicts, which made the saw story believable then. A method can control many if rumor travels farther than the saw into every street. For women, the threat carried a sexual message. Hanging upside down exposes the genitals, and the cut begins there. Even if rare, authorities benefited from fear, because it suggests total power. The state can cut through your sex. That image can force silence before trial without a judge saying anything. Saws targeted the center, yet some punishments targeted breasts. Sources link the iron spider to late medieval and early modern Europe, used on women accused of sexual or religious crimes. Claws, sometimes heated, hooked in and tore as the victim was pulled away. Even reconstruction keeps the threat alive today. Next one is number 2, iron spider. One historian quoted a description saying the claws ripped to formless masses the breasts of countless women condemned for sexual and religious crimes. That line gets repeated because it is direct. The iron spider, or breast ripper, used curved claws on a wall or handle, sometimes heated before use too. Sources link it to late medieval and modern Europe, connected to charges like adultery and witchcraft, abortion, and blasphemy. The action was hook in, then pull the body away so tissue tears. Heat made metal bite and scar. The focus on breasts shows punishment aimed at motherhood, not confession alone. Some pieces may be modern reconstructions, and criticism matters because props can rewrite history. Still, records and martyr tales agree on one point. Authorities aimed punishments at female body parts linked to sex and motherhood. Even when the tool varied, the target stayed consistent, and that consistency should bother you. After claws and fire, some punishments used no device at all. Forced parading turned the city into a weapon because the route created witnesses. Women accused of adultery, prostitution, witchcraft, or treason against the household could be marched while crowds shouted. When the street becomes a court, safety depends on luck each time. And the last is number 1, forced parading. Sources across Roman, medieval, and early modern history describe women punished through forced parading. The sentence was a walk through public streets under supervision, with everyone invited to stare. Accounts mention women marched half-naked or in thin shifts, with hair cut or smeared, while crowds shouted and followed close. In Roman North Africa, a lead collar on a female slave carried an order. "This is a cheating whore. Seize her because she escaped." That line turned streets into enforcement space. Passers-by became captors, so the parade never ended. Even an errand could trigger capture because the label stayed visible. Parading worked because it spread accusations before the record could protect you. Once a crowd hears the label, reputation loss starts. People could shout, throw objects, or grab, then claim morals. The state gets enforcement, but violence spikes. The woman can lose work and shelter, and harassment follows the walk home. What makes parading effective is the moving crowd. A jail cell hides violence, but a parade multiplies it because witnesses become messengers. The punishment keeps working after the walk ends, since the accusation sticks in memory. If a state can weaponize a sidewalk, what other spaces can it weaponize too? If any detail made you pause, drop it in the comments so we can dig deeper together. Tap the video on your screen now, because this story keeps getting darker.